My name is Susan Alloway. I'm from Northern California. I'm an artist, and I have had ET contact, and I'm going to tell about that today. So in 1978, the day I got out of the service, out of the Navy, my best friend and I decided that we were going to drive across country, and I was going to take all my stuff home and visit the family for a while. And one of the officers from my squadron had asked if I wanted to drive his new Volvo across country. Paid us $1,500 to do it because he needed it delivered to Raleigh, North Carolina. So we took off from San Diego the 14th of September 1978. We went all the way through the desert. We got up to Flagstaff, Arizona, and then we headed north for the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Saw all the beautiful country because I had served my country, but I had never seen it, and I wanted to see it. So that's what this trip was about. We went up to the north rim of Grand Canyon and then decided it was getting kind of dark, so we made our way to Cedar City, Utah, and got gas there, and decided we weren't going to get a hotel. We were just going to keep driving because it was a full moon that night, and the thought of driving across the desert was perfect. And Karen and I had done a lot of desert camping before, so we were comfortable with that. So we got gas in Cedar City and drove north on Interstate 15, which at the time was only 2 lanes to where it's now multiple, probably 4 lanes. So we're going north, and after the gas had filled up, we just had normal conversation, and we were waiting, and all of a sudden the moon did come up. It rose over the mountains that were on the east of us because we were going north. And it was so beautiful and so bright that night that we were just being playful, our usual playful selves, and great conversation. And we had put Steely Dan on, and Katie lied, I remember the song, and it was blasting, and the windows were down, and we were kind of playing with turn the lights off and driving in the shadows just by the moonlight. It was a beautiful, beautiful time. Fun, a lot of laughter. Then I noticed out of the blue that the moon didn't seem right because it had rose too fast. It was a little higher than I had expected it to be, but I just kind of took note and didn't say anything. And the conversation with Karen was, I remember just out of the blue saying, I hope I would get to see some of those really cool jackrabbits that I had seen at a previous camping trip months before with my friend Rick. And Karen had started dating Rick, so we were just talking about those things randomly. So I had mentioned to Karen that I wanted to see, I hope we get to see the jackrabbits, because I remember there were jackrabbits in the desert just a few months before with her friend Rick and my friend Rick, and Karen and Rick had started dating, and so we were just having that conversation, driving in the dark. By then I'm sure we had the lights on because it was on and off. It was just a fun night. And we'd only driven maybe 15 minutes, and the moon had come up. But it was odd. It wasn't where it was supposed to be. The stars were bright, the moon was bright, everything was fine 1 minute. The next minute, I just got this fear about me because the moon had disappeared. It completely disappeared. Gone. The stars were gone. I even stuck my whole body out of the car and looked around in every direction. And I said, maybe we should pull over. And she thought that was kind of odd too, and she was looking up through the windshield like, where's the moon? Pitch dark. It was just black outside and causing a lot of fear. And then out of the blue, Karen just stops. She stops the car right in the highway, in the lane. There's no cars anywhere. There's no moon. There's no stars. And something had changed. I'm not quite sure what it was. It was just an odd feeling. because we were in the road and she hadn't talked about it. Wasn't even sure why we had stopped. But we had stopped because there were jackrabbits in the road. About 30 jackrabbits, and they covered up both lanes. They were looking away from us, and they were in various poses. And we got out of the car, God knows why, and stood in front of the headlights, which was the only light out there. The light in the car, the light of the headlights. The moon was gone, the stars were gone. The jackrabbits were in the road, in the headlights. And then in a split second, the car went off, the lights went off, the music went off. Total silence. Split second, white light came down, like a milky white light, but you could still see the jackrabbits. And it was like a beam. It wasn't like this. It was like straight over the car, over the road, over the jackrabbits. And then the jackrabbits all turned around. And really slow, all together. And were looking at us. And they were no longer jackrabbits. They were just gray creatures about 3.5 feet tall. And the jackrabbits had been about 3.5 feet tall, and we couldn't figure out why we were standing there, why we had stopped. What is this? Where's the moon? Where are the stars? But when the jackrabbits turned around, there were creatures, alien gray creatures, and the moon and the stars were in their giant eyes, which is something I will never ever forget, seeing the moon and stars inside their eyes. And the last thing I remember was grabbing for Karen, like you would grab a child in the other passenger seat when you're stopping really quick and you're afraid that your groceries are going to turn over or your child's going to spill, or something like that. And I reached for her, and then we woke up in a diner in Grand Junction, Colorado. So we woke up in the diner in Grand Junction, Colorado, with our heads laid on the table. I was just like this. Karen was directly across from me, and it was one of those old-timey diners where everything is red, like red naugahyde, red tables, red everything. And the reason we woke up is because the waitress had patted me on the shoulder and she said, "Time to wake up, honey." I'll never forget that voice. I'll never forget looking across the table at Karen, waking up. And we had no idea how we got there or where we were. And I even said, "Where are we?" to the waitress, and she said, "You're in Grand Junction, Colorado." So, "What time is it?" At the same time I saw the clock, it's 6:28 in the morning. Well, the last time we remembered, it was between 9:15 and 9:30 the night before, and we don't know how we got to the diner. But the car is parked right out front. And I don't remember ordering food. I just remember Karen and I couldn't speak to each other. Only thing we could say is, "How did we get here? What the hell's going on?" The fear was the element. It's very hard to forget that kind of fear. And I don't remember, neither one of us remember how we got to a hotel, but we went to some old hotel, some place that we probably would have never stayed ourselves. And I remember walking in, and there were 2 beds, and then the bathroom. And when we got there, Karen just melted into the bed in the fetal position on the first bed closest to the door. And I tried to go take a shower. And here's the part. So when we woke up in the diner, we were covered with radiation burns. Don't know how I could forgot that part. Blistery skin. It hadn't all blistered yet, but it was red and swollen and burning. Like it could feel like you were on fire. And taking that shower had made it even worse. So I just remember wrapping a towel around me and just laying down beside Karen and just holding her because I was scared to death that we would get separated or parted, or we were just like right on the edge of like feeling crazy because we didn't know what had happened and we couldn't talk about it. So we slept for about 20 hours. And the next morning we got up and went to the car and we did our usual thing, just like everything was fine, even though we couldn't speak about it. We remembered the day before, remembered what a great time we had had. I remembered the Jackrabbits. Karen did not, but we both woke up in that diner. And I also was having feelings and memories that would just flash, 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 flash in my head, falling from the sky. And seeing the curve of the earth, I was so high up, and I was just falling. And I could see the mountains to the right, and the sun was rising, coming right through the cracks of the mountains, right through the valleys, and lighting up all the red rock below us. But I couldn't talk about remembering that at the time, but it was all going into my mind. So we go out to the car and we did our usual thing where we had used a AAA. Back then there was a triptych. It was a piece of paper, a little book, and it kept your mileage and how much gas you used, and little things about. We also had a map where we wrote little notes up to ourselves because it was such a wonderful trip. We knew we would probably do it again. But that morning, after waking up in that hotel and not even remembering how we got to the hotel and not even being able to talk about it, I was figuring up the mileage, and when I got to the point, the car still had a full tank. We're 365 miles away from where we were when we got gas, and the odometer did not have the mileage on it. So I couldn't even talk to Karen about it. All I could do was figure it out. And then I just showed her. She was driving. I just showed her. And of course her response was, how'd that happen, and we have no idea how that happened. So we're just going to keep on going. And we're burned still, and the burns have started coming up into little blisters, like little patchy blisters. And I felt like I had a fever. Our guts were just messed up. It was just not a good time. But at the same time, we're on a trip of a lifetime, and we're just going to keep going. So we had plans to stop in Denver, and multiple plans to stop at all of our friends all the way across country in their homes, their families, people we had been stationed with, and people like just some of Karen's friends even. And we could not stop in Denver. And my friend George and Juanita, all these years have wondered why, and I finally told Juanita, found out that it's because we were burned and we didn't know how we had even gotten to Grand Junction. So we just scooted on by Denver and went to, it was the tallest paved road in the United States. Enjoyed it up there, but it was like 14,000 feet we were already kind of sick, so that made us even sicker. So it was so high up that the Volvo was shooting black smoke out the back. I'll never forget that part. So we ended up going to Lake Dillon, Colorado, and we stayed there for 3 days, just trying to get ourselves together. And I remember we could hardly eat. We just walked around, looked at old gold mines, tried to stay busy, but we needed to sleep a lot because we were sick. Especially myself, I just remember me at that point mostly just sick. After that, we left, and time kind of seemed weird. It wasn't because you couldn't talk about the trip. We couldn't talk about it because as bad as we wanted to, it would just sit at the tip of our tongue, and it could be in your brain, but it wouldn't come out your mouth because it just inconceivable, I guess. There's no other way to explain it. Nothing made sense, so we were just going to go do something that made sense. So we stopped with friends, and Julie and Will in Chicago, and then we went up because we wanted to make sure that we hit Wisconsin. So of course we went to Wisconsin and got some cheese. And I know we weren't in our right mind because we bought this gigantic wheel of cheese, and why would we buy a gigantic wheel of cheese? Who knows? So I remember everywhere that we stopped, Indiana and everywhere after we stopped after that, everybody got cheese. So when we got to North Carolina, still pretty sick, tried to settle down. Very hard to tell the family about the trip. But we hit the highlights, and then we just tried to stay busy. I took her all the local places, Tony's and Gastonia and all the few little places, and then drove her to Atlanta to catch our plane back. That whole time we could hardly speak about it. It's not that we didn't want to, I don't think, because I wanted to talk to her, and I know she wanted to talk to me, but it made no sense. And so she was heading out, and I was going to stay for a couple weeks. And right after she left and I got home, I got really sick, and the only guess would be that was probably radiation poisoning that went along with all the rash, because my father was like, "What happened to you?" And also I had this giant red, which looked like a big red dark purple hickey on my neck, but it had glazed over and started to fill in, but it was a deep scoop mark, missing. And I had 2 weird marks on my back, which I still have all of these today. And I talked to my dad about it, but then I got really sick, and with the radiation poisoning, it was just sick as your body can get. And he wanted to take me to the hospital, but I begged him not to, because we had waited, 2 or 3 weeks already and not gone, because how were we supposed to explain that? Was the day I got out of the service. How do I explain waking up 360 miles away and radiation burns and seeing giant jackrabbits on the highway? But I tried to explain that to my father because I was so sick, and I was getting sicker and sicker. I thought for sure I was going to die. And I remember taking Dad's face just right between my hands and saying, "Daddy, you need to listen to me. Something happened to us on the way." And I was crying and I was puking. He was taking me back and forth to the bathroom because I couldn't walk. It was that sick. And he finally just said, "Just be really still in the bed, I'll be right back." He went down to the local drugstore, because I guess everybody back then, this is the 70s, had an Uncle Jim. And he asked for, I guess it was narcotics, because it was phenobarbital, which I'm not quite sure what it does, but it put me to sleep for 2 days. In a deep sleep, I remember nothing, but I still was having those flashbacks of the alien face, the jackrabbit face, the stars and the moon in the jackrabbit's eyes, all of that. And when I woke up, my body felt better, but my mind was just screwed because I had no idea. And my friend Karen was gone, so now there's really nobody to talk to about it. So I just let myself heal up as good as I could. Got as well as I could, because at 22 it's easy to bounce back. And flew home. And Karen and I were roommates, so she was dating Rick, and I was just starting to date the man that I'd be married to for 35 years. And thank goodness we had these guys in our life, because it just kind of helped us not have to talk to each other. And we always had loved cooking together and camping, and we just couldn't do any of that anymore because it all led back to us having to talk about it. So she went her way and I went mine, and I did have odd things happen after that, but nothing like this experience. But the experience left me with, I call them my superpowers. I don't know what else to call them. A little precognitive stuff, and I do see things definitely before it happens, but the feeling in the rooms I can always pick up, and occasionally I even have, I don't know how to say it, but that's why I call it the superpower, where I can kind of zoom to the ceiling and look down and get a different perspective as to that conversation that somebody just said, how it would affect every person in the room and beyond the house. And I always thought that was extraordinary but scary, and I still work with that to this day. But I've learned to love it better than dismiss it and hate it, because it is my biggest intuition and sometimes my best friend. So I ended up having 2 children, and in 1989, after I had decided we weren't going to have any more children, I got really sick, and I went to a doctor in Ventura and ended up having to have surgery. And while he was doing the surgery afterwards, he found some weird stuff. And after the next morning, after the hysterectomy, he said, "I've got questions. You told me you had never had surgery." To which I had never had surgery. And he said, "Well, at some time, what I found, at some time, you have had surgery, but we could not find any scars. We looked, there are no scars, and we couldn't figure this out, so I need you to help me figure this out, because I've never seen anything like it." And at the time, he had already been a surgeon for 12 years. So I instantly had the red flag of knowing, uh-oh, that night in 1978's got something to do with this. Because I knew I had been taken up into the spaceship. There was no doubt about it, even though I'll tell you a little bit later that I definitely have confirmed that. But he said, "Your appendix at some time has ruptured, and we found that it had been sealed up, and your fallopian tube had been laid up against it and sealed in a high heat cauterization process. And your right ovary was gone." Well, I'm not sure what to say about that, because I knew I had had my right ovary. And just a few months before, because I had trouble with a cyst on my right ovary while I was in the Navy. So odd, but just recently, I've got my old military file, my medical record, it proves that I had my right ovary 3 months before I got out. So where did the ovary go? All I could think of is that night in the desert, because I had never had other surgery. And I just blew it off and said, I don't know. I don't really know what happened. He just let it go. The doctor came back the next day and said, I keep thinking about that. Are you sure? Because I didn't see any scars, but how did this happen? Well, I was curious too, but at that time, I just wanted to go home, not have to think about it again. And he dropped it as a curiosity, and I dropped it. But I'm pretty sure that that's what happened, is they had done surgery on me. What else am I to think? They had fixed my appendix and maybe taken my ovary. I don't know, but I do know that I was getting ready to find out later. So I just kept it quiet, didn't much talk about it. Was not in my life. Went through a divorce, broken family. And then about 7 or 8 years later, I'm at my desk working. I'm an artist, and I was building a fairy house. And I heard, not in my ear, but it came into my head, like a telepathy. It was for sure that was that. And it said, go look up UFO movie. And I was like, what was that? So I got my iPad and I looked up UFO movie. And it came up, John Yost's movie, Alien Abduction Answers. And that was in 2022. I believe it was May 3rd, the exact same day that that movie had been released. So, okay. I listened to my intuition, went to Amazon, downloaded it, actually bought the movie, which I've never bought a movie. I usually just rent it and look at it. Sat down in the chair, really curious at this point because, what was that message about? Why am I looking at this? Didn't know anything about John Yost, knew nothing about this movie. And in the first 17 seconds, when he discussed what had happened to him as a child, which was a UFO visit, an ET visit. He had had contact. And he talked about the government knowing, and he just wanted to let his story out. And that just brought me down to my knees, right out of my chair, into the floor, into a puddle of mess. All I could think of is, okay, I need a little bit more, watch a little bit more. About 20 minutes in, all I could do was just, rock in my chair, and I was crying because I knew, every bit of me knew it was time to tell the story, not keep it quiet anymore, quit fearing because my family's not all around me anymore. I don't have to worry about the government coming into my home. I didn't worry about those things anymore. I just knew this is my time. I got to say it. I have to tell the story. And it was just flooding back every time I would watch any part of the movie. It took me 3 or 4 days to finish the movie. And out of the blue, I just saw John Yost. I had friended him on Facebook. And I'm not a celebrity person, and I had no idea who he was or what his expectations of what this movie might do to other people like me. So I saw him pop up on Messenger on Facebook, and I just hit it. And can we talk? And he answered, and he said, yes. And I said, I just watched your movie, and I don't even know what to say, but I need some help here. And the movie was about him getting some help. And Deb Shakti Buller was the help on the movie. She was the quantum hypnosis therapist that had helped John through his memories with hypnosis. And, I had never even thought about hypnosis before. I'd never even considered it. But I instantly knew it must be the thing because there was so many questions in my mind, and nobody else to talk to about it. So I contacted Deb Shakti. He put me in touch with Deb's. And Deb's was right on it, and we talked and set up a date. And then I called Karen, my friend Karen, and said, after all these years, it was so weird that I found her number in my phone after all these years, and I just called her. And we have pet names for each other. Eunice, she's Eunice, I am a Venus. And so we discussed our old friendship in Eunice and Venus, not Susan and Karen. It seemed easier to do it that way. And we're quite characters that way, so it was an interesting conversation. She was ready to talk about it. She did remember things. She still remembered how scared was waking up in that diner and us not knowing how we got there. We didn't have any other kind of trauma other than the radiation burdens and bad memories, but we discussed the trip and found out that she had pictures of the trip, the whole trip, except that part of the trip. It was so odd. And the pictures afterwards were so old that we couldn't see the burns or anything on us. But it explained the trip that we remembered. It was all in photo. And we've become really close again. And it's really great having my best friend Karen back in my life, because when you share something like that, it's deep trauma, and the only way that seems to help is to have somebody that was there with you talk about it. And I felt like totally blessed to have Karen to talk about it too. And I told her I was getting ready to have hypnosis, and so I did. I had quantum hypnosis with Deb Shakti. So made an appointment with Deb Shakti. We met on Zoom. She was the most wonderful, graceful sister feeling I've had in a very long time. I know I had picked the right person. And we did a lot of breathing techniques together, and I could feel myself just clicking right into that story. And then she put me under. We had it all on videotape. There were very few questions. I just told my story. And afterwards, when she woke me up, it seemed that all of the stress, the fear, that fear doesn't even cover it, it's deep. But the fear, all of that, the trauma of that night had just been lifted. To the point of, it also lifted the divorce. It lifted the loss of my family. It lifted all the weight of all the years of carrying that around. That happened in the Jackrabbits and the aliens, and it just lifted it off of me to where I could see it more open and allow the feelings of, did they do me good? Did they help me? What happened in the desert? When the doctor took my appendix, it had already served its purpose, but where did that seam come from? Where did the surgery come from? Well, it's the only thing that explains that. And finding the proof in my military record made a huge difference too. And when you're under hypnosis, you see all that, and nobody can show you. It's literally, you remember absolutely everything. And I do remember going in the craft, and Karen was up there, even though I didn't see her. They told me she was there with me, behind me. I remember sitting on the table. I remember touching the ET because I asked, can I touch you? Not with my mouth, in verb. No, nothing was verbal. It was all just communication in her head. It was telepathic. I guess that's the only word for it. It doesn't come in your ears, it just comes in your head, and it's very clear, but it's not exact wordage. You just know what they mean. So when I said, I'm sitting on a table, can I touch you? It said yes, standing right here. So I remember touching it, and then just thinking, and I'm not quite sure where that came from, but I smelled my hand afterwards, and it was like, ooh, that's just gross. And it said, that's not gross. I am you. You are me. We are the same. And that, I just could not understand the concept until after I let all the fear go. And then I could look at it through a different way. And it's changed my life in so many ways. But I know that they had done work on my lower right side, and I'm sure that that's what they were doing during the whole conversation with the ET. And then we don't know how we got down into the car, but that has something to do with me remembering falling. I guess they put me softly in the car, put Karen softly in the car, and then we drove to the diner. There's no memory of that except a small flash of memory standing in front of the car, in front of the diner. And we both looked across the street, and there was one big red rock formation, only one. So, not knowing what to do next, after talking to Debs and hypnosis, I reached out to someone that I had seen in the UFO community and researcher, and he was part of MUFON, and it was Preston Dennett. I just reached out to him on Facebook Messenger. He responded right away. I told him who I was, what had happened in 1978, and why I was calling him, because I was just looking for some more help. So after hours and hours and hours of talking, he asked me if I could put my story in his new book, Humanoids and High Strangeness, and I'm chapter 19. And we did all that. And then he suggested that I contact MUFON and put in my case. So very nervously, I went online and found MUFON, to which I had heard about and knew a little bit about. But putting in a case is another thing, because this kind of makes it official. And then that's the point where you worry, is the government going to bother me, or will anything happen to me because I am telling this story? So I put in my case, and just a few days later, I guess it went over, or immediately, I'm guessing within a day or two, it went over the desk of Earl Grey Anderson in Southern California, and he assigned it to a MUFON researcher, investigator with the ERT, and his name was Richard Benaziac. And we talked for hours, maybe 2, 4, 6, 8 hours, not always at the same time, but and broke it down into little parts. And he was a police officer for like 35 plus years, and investigator, and I knew he would do a great job, and it was very easy to talk to him because my brother and my dad had both been cops, and I was a little afraid at first that it was going to be like an interrogation, but it wasn't at all. It was just he was so professional and so open-minded, and just listened to me and then asked the most deep questions. And then he would come back every few days and tell me what he had found, and that he was looking for the diner that we had woken up in Grand Junction, Colorado. And so I told him a little bit about it, and the one thing that I remembered that I could tell him was about that red rock across the street from the diner. I remembered hot wind, car sitting in front, don't remember anybody else in the diner, don't remember another car in there. And every few days he did call me back, but he found out that there were other cases that had been filed with MUFON on that exact same day, within 24 hours, within 12 hours, within 5 miles, within 25 miles of other sightings that people had seen September 14th, 1978, which was so exciting to me. And a few of them said it was so tremendous what they had seen, the craft was so tremendous that it was like the size of an aircraft carrier. So that explained to me why the moon and the stars was gone, because whatever it was over us was tremendous and had blocked the moon, which was about here. So it had to be super low over us. And that also explained the beam, perfectly round beam. So all those little things that he found really made sense. And we're pretty sure we found the diner. He actually called the owners, and they own it now, but they bought it, I believe it was in the 80s. But it was actually there in 1978 and opened and decorated in red. So all that kind of made sense. And there were so many other things that came up, all through MUFON, all through Richard, through Earl Grey, and the response was so positive. They just took me in, they answered my questions, I just felt whole again. No fear. I didn't worry about my name being said. I don't worry about the government coming to my home. There's so many thousands and thousands of people that this has happened to. I think the government just treats it differently now because it's everywhere, and not just in this country, but in every country. And one of the weirdest things that I recently found out was I was watching Ancient Aliens, and Debbie Ziegelmeyer, who is the sister of Chuck Zukowski, and they have this theory that where they've looked at ET contact reports and cattle mutilation reports and all those things that it seems like is happening on the 37th parallel, which runs right across the United States. And when I saw this, I just reached over for my phone and picked it up, and I asked Siri, where is Cedar City, Utah? Which parallel? And the answer was the 37th parallel. It just tied it all into me. And I felt very blessed that I had not been hurt, but returned. Not mutilated, but healed? I don't know. It's hard to say. I still question that to this day. All I know is I had not had surgery, but yet someone had done surgery. The only time that could have happened is when I was in the craft. And it's so weird because I don't even know what the craft looks like. I just knew it was huge, pure black. Had the beam, had the table, one pedestal leg. ET here, and there was an ET here. Telepathy, came back to Earth, ended up in the car, ended up in Grand Junction, ended up with surgery I never had. But through it all, and after the hypnosis, it's probably surely one of the most profound things that's ever happened, and has opened me up to finally understand all those feelings and the fear. And now that I've gotten through them, it's just, I can't say it's a joyous thing, but it has become joyous in the people that I have met in this community that all have their found stories of things that we're not taught. So when I was in the craft, I remember everything was white, fuzzy. The only word I have for it is hologram, because it had depth to it. Nothing was stuck to the wall, everything floated. But there were these railings in front of me that were shooting constant flashing messages. And it was the same thing that the messages that I used to get when I was young, which I thought were dreams, but at the same time I do remember seeing small creatures at my window when I was 4 and hiding from them and getting burned on the heater grill with my knees, trying to get away from them being at my window. So those things I do remember. The messages they were showing me was the same messages when I was a child, of tanks, military tanks, explosions, mayhem, total chaos. And when I was young, it was right on my street, on Vanderbrook Road. And I would wake up and look out my window, expecting that to be going on. It gave you awful fear when you were a child. But the message was, change the world, be your best, do your best, because if you don't, this is what's going to happen. And that's way beyond what a 4, 5, 6-year-old can comprehend, so I didn't really even mention it to anyone, because I kind of thought it was natural, just a dream, and everybody else was having the same dream. So with that said, I also want to make sure that I'm making this because my grandchildren don't know this story. They don't know about my experience. They've always been too young, and then when we were all separated after the divorce, it's been very hard to come forward and not include them. But I want them to know that if this ever happens to them, that I hope that they'll tell someone and come and tell me, and not think that they're crazy, because they're not. I believe it happens generationally, and I believe it had happened to my grandmother because of something that she had told me years ago when I asked her, why are all the windows in the house closed with those big giant nails? And you couldn't open a window anywhere in the house. And that was in Cramerton, North Carolina. And her answer, as we're sitting on that front porch swinging, just being relaxed with each other, she just looked down at me and she said, they're like that because there's monsters out there. And I'm not sure where that came from, because there's no monsters in Cramerton, North Carolina. But it makes me wonder, because she never spoke of anything like that, and she was very quiet and graceful, if maybe that had happened to her. Either way, I just want my grandkids to know. Just tell your parents, and don't doubt yourself. And it might not just be a dream, because if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And I have those worries every day, because I don't ever want you to have that kind of fear that I had. But that's it. That's my message.